All right, today is Wednesday, March 20th, 2019. Today we're going to be talking about this drive shaft. So we're going to start from the very beginning because maybe there's some guys watching who've never replaced a drive shaft before. So on these Impalas or on these X-frame cars, it's referred to as a two-piece drive shaft. However, it's really like four-piece. You got the rear drive shaft, you have your connecting U-joint shaft, and that bolts onto the front drive shaft, and then you have your transmission yoke. So on this particular car, I'm swapping an aluminum power glide to a 350 transmission. So the yoke is different. The yoke for the 350 is a fine spline, and the yoke for the power glide, which I actually have right here, is a more coarse. I believe this is 27 spline off the top of my head. Don't quote me, but I know it's different. This is coarse spline, so that's the difference in that. So I got this thing off of eBay. I mean, Jeg sells them. They're all over eBay. Any transmission shop should have them. I think it was like $50 shipped to the house, maybe. Okay. So the difference, apparently there's a difference in the length in the transmission from a aluminum power glide to a 350, which a lot of the forums you read online, most of them say, oh, it's a direct swap. It's a direct swap. You just have to swap out this yoke. It's a direct fit. Well, it's not really. You have to change out the front drive shaft or get that shortened. So when they say shorten, I mean, it's really simple. All they do is chop it and re-weld it to whatever length you tell them. So the measurement that you do is you do from the end of the output shaft on the transmission, which I'm going to show you in a second, to the middle of this bolt hole on the frame. You give them that measurement, and any good driveline shop should be able to make you a yoke appropriate for that length. So I got this made at centee drive shaft. They're in Houston. They're on Griggs. It was referred to by Rocker Pat. It's one of my subscribers, so I went and checked them out. Place has been there a long time. They have a lot of reviews on Google. It's not the most beautiful storefront, but I dropped this thing off at like 3:30 on Monday. I called them at 4:30 Monday with the measurement, and by 11 a.m. on Tuesday, they called me saying this thing was ready. So I had this done, chopped that down, and then a front U-joint, and it was about $120, which I don't know if that's on the high end. I thought it might have been a little bit on the high end, but I didn't even bother shopping around because, I mean, I don't like driving around getting estimates. You spend more time doing that and more gas doing that than just taking it somewhere. So I went with what he suggested, and here we are. Not even 48 hours later, I got it back in my possession, and we're going to stab it in. So this is a polyurethane carrier bearing. So this is considered an upgrade. I think this thing was like $75. You can do the stock bearing. If you have a stock car, them things are sold at AutoZone. They're like $20. It'll work. It's terrible though. I mean, it might last on a stock car with a little 283 power glide that you're putting down the street with. Anything that you plan on mashing on the gas, it's going to rip that rubber around the bearing. It's going to rip it right out. So those things are like best for direct replacement for original equipment only. This one's a little bit beefier. The other option would be a solid bearing, which I've had a solid bearing. I've ran them before with slip yoke in the rear end. Whenever you do the solid bearings, you must put a slip yoke on the back end, on the back piece of the drive shaft. If not, and I've done this before, I know because I've done this, didn't know any better, nobody told me, learned it on my own. I bought a solid bearing for a 64 that I had because I kept ripping the stock bearing. It had hydraulics, it was lifted in front and back, and kept ripping the bearing. So I bought a solid bearing, and nobody told me about slip yoke, so I threw it in. This was probably like in 2001, 2002. Threw it in, drove it down the street, and ripped up the solid bearing, because as the car's bouncing up and down or driving, you know, it's constantly jamming this in with the movement of the rear end and the movement of the body on the frame, and it jammed it in and it busted the solid bearing, brand new solid bearing that I bought. So if you're running one of these, you don't have to do that, because this is polyurethane or plastic or whatever, so it has a little bit of slack. I don't remember it being loose when I dropped it off. It might have been a little bit, but I could have swore it was tight, but we'll see. But when you run a solid bearing, you got to run a slip. And that's a whole nother ball game. I mean, those, you know, slip yoke goes here. You have to measure up and down on your frame. It's not complicated, but it's a whole nother thing. So I believe from the output shaft on the 350 to the measurement of the bolt hole is 23.5 inches. So it's really simple. Got two 9/16 bolts. Got the U-joint bolts here, 1/2 inch. Wish I had new ones, but I'm just going to reuse these. They work. They just don't look good. So I'm going to go ahead and try and stab this thing in. Should go in pretty easy. And I'll bring y'all back. All right, we're back, and it's been about 2 hours, and I got this thing in. It didn't exactly stab in place. Actually, it's kind of tight under here. Actually, that went nothing like the TV shows say it goes. That took 2 hours to put a drive shaft in. Reason being, I don't know if it was that billet carrier bearing, center support, whatever you want to call it, or, well, I guess it had to be, because it wasn't sliding back enough to set these U-joints in this rear end. So I guess it had to be it has to be the center support. So anyways, the front drive shaft looked good. It goes in place just fine. I did have to wallow out these holes for the center support. I used that Eastwood carbide deburring bit on an air die grinder. So basically I had to, and it's kind of twisted here, I don't know what angle I'm at, but I had to elongate these holes less than 1/4 inch. But man, it, you know, wasn't planning on that. So I had to elongate the holes so that the whole assembly would go back further. That way it would seat in these, where are we at? Yeah. That way it would seat on these U-joints. Anyways, so I was anticipating that would take about 5 minutes and 2 wrenches, but as usual, nothing goes as planned. So it took a little bit more effort, but it's in. That was today's goal, is get this thing in. Everything's tight, spins fine. It's in neutral right now. Back end's off the ground. Everything spins fine. There's no slop. There's no slack, it seems, at all, really. It's pretty tight. So hopefully we don't have any vibrations or anything like that. I mean, won't know until we actually drive it. But that's today's goal, and we got it done. But like I say, these TV shows on these TVs sure make things look a lot easier. I mean, they're building cars in, 30 minutes with commercials. They're like, let's take it on to paint. And next thing you know, customer's picking it up. Man, it's nothing like that. So, anyways, we got it in. Next thing, I got my radiator. Let me take a little picture of that. So the radiator came in. Picked it up yesterday, actually. Today I picked up this little drain from O'Reilly. It's just generic. I think it's 3/8 fitting. So it's notched. It's actually super notched. So this should clear the 500 gearbox just fine. I'm gonna epoxy the top and bottom, because I like the aluminum look, but nothing on the car is polished or shiny, except the exhaust manifold. So I'm gonna throw it in there on the support and see how it looks. But I was thinking on epoxying the top half, or everything except the fins. Maybe just mask the fins, epoxy all this black SPI, let it sit for a day and put it in. But that's the radiator. It's got a hella notch in it. Should clear better than good. And I already got the hoses, so I'm gonna just mock this thing up a little bit here and see what it needs. I might have to drill holes a little bit, but we'll see. So that's it for today. Still on track for this weekend. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.